Until recently, we knew practically nothing of Sogdian history and culture of the beginning of our era. Well, from the first century, we had one paragraph in Chinese sources and one mention in Ptolemy. We didn't have a single excavated building, just some pottery. When we started our project on that collection of the British Museum, it was really interesting because collection of the British Museum is the best collection of early Sogdian material. This collection forced us in some way to concentrate on early history from the first century of our era in order to show what actually do we have. Coins of Hercodes, which were minted in the middle of Zarafshan Valley, coins of Ashtat, minted in the Principality of Nakhchab, which is modern Karshi, and then coins of somebody called Zag, as we figured out a couple of weeks ago, who used to be called in scholarly literature for about 150 years Vsega Haris. That should be actually dismissed. At the beginning of the first century Domini, imitations of Antiochus, which were minted originally in Samarkand, branched into three separate coinages. Here they are positioned horizontally, 1, 2, 3. Third one had this strange story about it, very ugly, I would say, distorted image of horse from the coins of Antiochus after 200 years of imitations was suddenly supplemented by quite good portrait on the obverse. Portrait which had no precedent before in Central Asian numismatics. The portrait of a man who obviously has a cranial deformation, that is a habit of Central Asian nomads, who actually has a specific, very popular among Central Asian nomads of the first century Anno Domini, goatee, Espanol beard, who actually, very non-Greek, as you can see, he has very long face with very long nose. On the obverse, you have inscription calling him Irkodes, in genitive Irkodi, and on the other side, we have an interesting creature in the middle. It's actually semi-rooster, semi-human being who has fire coming out of his shoulders. He holds high torch with a fire, and the inscription on the left says Ordethroi, and on the right Makaroi. Makaroi is genitive of Greek makaros, it's blessed. Ordethroi is Iranian compound, the second part of which is certainly athar, fire, and the first one is hard to interpret, possibly something connected to the protection. That was suggestion by, as old as early 20th century by Alud de la Fille. That is the portrait of the man. The portrait of the man is well known among Central Asian nomads. These wonderful riders from Arlat plates have exactly the same hairstyle, the same cranial shape, and all kind of other things that make them very similar. First of all, we have a couple of such rooster men in Khwarezm in recent paintings discovered in Akhchihan Kala. We have them on Sogdian terracotta. Please note this birdie feet of these creatures on Sogdian ossuaries, and of course on Sogdian couches in China, where they present on sarcophagi. This creature is no doubt Srosh, in other words, protector of fire in Zoroastrian tradition. And because are in genitive, we actually can assume that a man who was called Irkodes, who was obviously of Sarmatian origin, his name is likely to be Sarmatian, claimed that he is Zoroastrian and follower of Zoroastrian religion on the reverse of his coin, despite his very nomadic look on the obverse. Soon it changed, and they forgot about rooster legs and started looking like Parthian sculptures. These coins affected something else. We're going now to the Principality of Nakhchab, which is actually in modern Karshi. The earliest coins depended on the coins of Hercodes. They, in fact, in the upper corner, you see how one copies another. And then there is a long line of imitations. Ones have an inscription partially preserved, which actually says Ashtat in Sogdian. And these coins lead us to these magnificent coins with magnificent portrait. Well, the upper two examples of these imitations, below to the right two coins are coins of Ashtat, ruler of Nakhchab in the first century Anno Domini. It's clearly written in Sogdian behind his head, Ashtatu. On the left, for comparison, I actually put the coin of Hiraeus, a ruler from Bactria from the same time, whose portrait affected this portrait, modified it in some way. And this is the appearance of Sogdians of the first century of our era, ruling class. There is a small denomination with a horse. That's how this coinage of Ashtat looks like. Well, it has incredible Greek inscription on the back, which says Basileus Antiochi. If we look at the coins, we would see that there is a warrior dressed as Greek. Moreover, he has a long cloak, and we have all reasons to believe that this long cloak, which is shown in a very complex way, was actually taken from a sculpture. He is an archer, and in a very rare pose, he actually shot his arrow and looks where this arrow actually ended. In the whole Hellenistic sculpture, as much as I was able to discern, the only type is Apollo of Leocharas, which was reproduced. On the coin, it actually says Basileus Antiochi, and this is a Greek warrior. What does Basileus Antiochus does on the coin, other side of which actually occupied by a portrait of nomadic ruler who has a perfectly Zoroastrian name, Ashtatu, which is theophoric in Zoroastrian? Well, he must have been progenitor of the dynasty. Antiochus was the last Hellenistic ruler who was in possession of Sogdiana. He was half Sogdian because his mother, Apama, was actually the daughter of Spitamenus. Thus, he was a suitable progenitor for local dynasty. In conclusion, what I would like to say is that suddenly we got a story. We have a country which has Zoroastrian faith, formerly nomadic rulers with their hairstyles, their costumes, their portraits, not imitating anything. This is an original portrait of this nomadic ruler, and it is formulated in Sogdiana earlier even than in Bactria. Hiraeus is later. And finally, in the first century Anno Domini in Sogdiana, there was a still strong Hellenistic heritage. They knew who was Basileus Antiochus. They knew something about Greek. They could actually spell things and even correctly insert a co-joining letter in a compound. Thank you very much.